the president of the Alachua County League of Cities, who has one of the proposals that we're going to talk about tonight, and also the first vice president of the Florida League of Cities, which currently has no proposals on any of these. So this is with the Alachua County League of Cities. What we called this meeting for is actually we had citizen comment. I think Miss Lori contacted me and wanted to hear more about what the Boundary Adjustment Act is really about, and trying to clear up some information or just learn about the differences between all of them, and to find out how that fits in, what that does as far as for the people in the city of Hawthorne, the incorporated area of Hawthorne, as well as in the other 8 municipalities as well in the other unincorporated area. So what I'm going to try and do is take just a brief time and give just a brief history of where it started from, what it came from, how it got involved, what it does, and what's all involved in it. And then I'll do a short summary of what the this is the current Boundary Adjustment Act, 14 pages long, and go over the Alachua County Commission recommended changes, and then go over the Urban Reserve Act and the proposed changes, which is by the Alachua County League of Cities, which is the 9 municipalities, and then also go over what Representative Keith Perry is proposing, so which is basically just a repeal everything. And so I'll go over the differences between that. First off, this is a PowerPoint presentation. I'll get into that in a little bit. Whenever I go over the Urban Reserve Act, it's a PowerPoint presentation actually City of Gainesville staff put together to brief the City of Gainesville Commission. So that way you have their information from that. Also have up here a picture of the reserve areas and the extraterritorial areas, as well as the incorporated limits. So we'll use Hawthorne since most people are familiar with Hawthorne the most. The darkest area is the actual incorporated. The city limits part of it was considered the city of Hawthorne. The darker shaded area is the urban reserve area. And then this part out here is the extraterritorial area. And I've already told people earlier, if I go too fast, please feel free to stop me. Just put your hand in the air, ask a question. I'm perfectly fine with that. So all questions are good questions. All right. So first off, let's start with how the Boundary Adjustment Act got started. First off, whenever I got started with it was here in the 2011 was when I first got started with it. Mick and Opie kept bringing it up that they've been having problems with it. Other cities would say they had problems with it. Hawthorne, we haven't had a problem with it because at that time, because we hadn't had any need to annex, we hadn't had any need to change property boundaries or urban reserve boundaries. Matter of fact, we even never requested for the area we have. It was given to us in 2006 is the urban reserve area that the county gave to us for that. For a long time, Hawthorne didn't even have an urban reserve area, period, just because there was never even a request for that. So the way it got started was in the about the mid to late 80s. There were several votes for consolidation between Gainesville and Alachua County. For those that were around, probably remember that part. So there were several votes for that, and discussion with state legislatures about that, about how they can combine Gainesville and Alachua County. So finally they got tired of it, and they said basically, what we're going to do is we're going to put out the Boundary Adjustment Act, and you're going to have a vote, and you're either going to consolidate Gainesville and Alachua County, or the Boundary Adjustment Act. If that fails, the Boundary Adjustment Act will go into effect. So basically, it'll go become the law of the land by not voting for consolidation. And so that's what happened. It basically set out a way for annexations, a way for planning with the reserve areas, a way for a review process and an appealing process. It does give more, the good part about the Boundary Adjustment Act, it does give more rights to citizens than what just the state law does. The state law, you can't, there's certain parts of it you can't appeal as just a citizen. You can get automatically annexed if you're, I think it's 10 acres or less, which isn't a good thing. Nobody wants, as far as in the discussions that I've had, any kind of compulsory annexation. Even with the county, they had the discussion at their meeting in early January in a Grace Night conference room and it was if they wanted to make basically reducing the enclaves. And the enclaves are these areas out here, and the discussion was around Newberry, so I use them as an example. They got one of the most than anybody, but all these little pockets of land. So as far as trying to reduce enclaves, what they were presenting was how do you reduce those? Do you make them annex if they're surrounded by a city? Is what the county was talking about. Do you have it, if you sell your property, does it change over to the city whenever you sell it, so at time of sale? Or do you just leave it like it is, and you just provide, the city provides the services in that area, and then the county, or they come up with a way of bringing it up as far as who pays those bills for that service. So say fire and police. Say Newberry provides fire and police for the city limits, and outside the city limits, fire and police are provided by the county. Well, if they do that, then these little pockets, they're not paying into that. So who's going to pay into that if you respond to a 911 call there? So that's some of the discussion that they had, and that's kind of like what Part 2 of the general annexation law has, is identifying that part of it. What they decided at that meeting was they didn't want to move forward with any compulsory annexation. They had, I think, 2 county commissioners during that meeting which were wanting to do it at the time of sale. So, and you can look back, I'm not going to name the county commissioners that were wanting to do that, but they were wanting to do it at the time of sale, which would mean if you bought this piece of property and it's surrounded by the city limits of Newberry, then whenever that's sold at the time of change of ownership, or even change of ownership, because it was basically just like you deeded it to your family, it would probably change to the city of Newberry then. So that's what they brought up there. Yes,
Can I ask, how did those little pieces get left out of the annexation?
that's a good point. You're not supposed to have enclaves. You're not supposed to have enclaves whenever this takes place. What happened, and what's happened a lot up here in like Alachua, is you have voluntary annexations. They start out here, and they start going around, and basically they connect together. You're not supposed to have little fingers or anything else like that. You know, you're not supposed to have anything like that that goes out that are little fingers or creates a way that you can't get to your property without going through a city limits. So if you're in an unincorporated area and there's a road, then they can't surround you with other barriers where you have to go through there to provide services. So that's the way state law is, and state law is a little more clear with that than what the county current Boundary Adjustment Act is. So under the Boundary Adjustment Act is how a lot of that got started, is it goes through and then nobody argues it, and so it stays that way.
So those little areas that are not in the city is because they protested against it?
No.
They said, no, I don't want to be?
No, well, kind of. They just didn't voluntarily come into the city. These other properties around them voluntarily came into the cities. If you do a referendum, like if you have, say, a 100-acre area, you know, say the city of Hawthorne had like a 100-acre area here to the north part of the city, and we wanted to see if they wanted to be a part of the city, so we held a referendum. Well, if that got voted down, then nobody would come in. If it got voted in, then that entire block would come in. It wouldn't be one parcel or no parcel comes in. It would be the entire block would come in. In a voluntary annexation, you can do it parcel by parcel. You can say, and this is what Alachua did, is for 2 years, shortly after all this took place, for 2 years, they put out there that they're going to open up voluntary annexations. You're not going to have to pay any fees to come into the city. If you want to be a part of the city, we're going to handle that part. The only thing you're going to have to pay for, and some of them make different choices as far as they'll pay for the advertisements as long as you pay for the zoning, or vice versa, where they'll pay for everything. So, and then you come into the city by doing that, by voluntarily saying you want your property to come in. But it has to connect to the city limits for you to be able to do that. So if you're out here in this open area, then you can't just say that you just want to be a part of it and annex in, because it doesn't touch. It's not contiguous is the term that they use in all those documents. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, the Florida State statute forbids enclaves, correct?
Right.
Here we got some enclaves.
Exactly.
Now, that sounds like an enforcement issue.
Yes.
So why do you want to rewrite a whole law if what you have here is an enforcement issue?
Right. Well, this is under the Boundary Adjustment Act. This isn't under state law that this happened. So this happened under the Boundary Adjustment Act, not state law.
The county boundary adjustment.
Right.
I'm talking about the state boundary adjustment.
The state doesn't have a Boundary Adjustment Act.
Oh, not, okay, I got you.
The state annexation laws doesn't allow for it.
Enclaves are allowed under the county boundary
Well,
adjustment act.
It technically is not, as far as what it has in there, but if there is no, if there's no challenge from the county, or there's no challenge to that property owner that's inside that area, then they can do it. So it's one of those technicalities that they allow them to do it as there's no challenge to it. So if there's a challenge to it, then they can't do it. So they're technically not supposed to be able
Who
to
could
do it.
challenge it? Anybody?
Anybody, and that's the difference between the acts right now, is that right now anybody can challenge it if you're an affected party, and that's the key part to look in all these parts, is who they consider an affected party. Whether you're just the part that's being taken over, whether you're the part that's being omitted, or whether you're the part, because say you're around this area, and say the city of Newberry offers great services and whatever, and you want to be in the city, but you didn't get included in the plan there to be able to come in. Say they offer them something to come in and not that piece of parcel. Well, then that would be them that they could challenge it as well. So the people that it goes around, the people that's brought into it, and the other unincorporated area that owns property adjacent to it. So that would be the differences between the acts as far as which one provides which. And that's in the affected person, which is normally listed in the very first part of any of these acts under definitions, which is the very first part of the Urban Reserve Act, paragraph 1. So that's some of the key differences on that. Did you have a question?
Yeah.
Yes.
These parcels that you said weren't paying anything, aren't they paying MSTU for taxation for fire service and?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. They're paying that to the county. If you're in the unincorporated area, so you're this piece of parcel right here, you're paying it into the county, which is one similarity here in Hawthorne. Each of these cities are a little bit different, how they handle or choose their level of services. For instance, Gainesville, they provide all of their fire, all of their police, and they have their own taxing structure for that. So they don't participate in the MSTU for that. The unincorporated area, everybody's in the unincorporated area, you have something on your tax bill, on your property taxes, that says MSTU, which is a Municipal Service Taxing Unit. And so for every $1,000 your property's worth, that's what you pay towards. Well, the city of Hawthorne, when we got rid of the police and the fire department in 2009, I think it was beginning of 2009 into 2008, we went into the MSTU. So the people in the city limits pay the same as the people outside the city limits for the MSTU. Before, what used to happen, before we started and that was the whole squabble of why they started the fire and the police, was because the county was wanting to charge more than what we were bringing in the MSTU as a contract. The county fire services, we used what the city of Hawthorne said, I was on the commission at the time, what the city of Hawthorne used to do is they used to collect the MSTU. And then they would have a contract with the county for police and fire, and they would pay that back out, depending on what that amount was. So, you could negotiate a lower amount than what you were collecting in the MSTU already, and so you'd already have that, and then you'd have either administration fee, or if you were providing other services that the police and fire would normally provide, if you wanted to add a level of service, then you could add that as well too. So right now it's just an even swap in the city of Hawthorne. Each of these are a little bit different. Micanopy, for example, they participate in the fire MSTU. They don't participate in the sheriff's MSTU. They provide their own fire services, and they still participate in MSTU, but they don't participate in the sheriff's MSTU. The main reason is they think that's unconstitutional, that you're already paying for it with your property taxes originally, and so they don't think you should be double dipping. So that's a lot of their reasoning behind it. And each one of these are a little bit different. I think Waldo is just now going through the decision right now what they're going to do, since they just disbanded their police department. So that's a little bit different for each one, especially in La Crosse when you get to some of these smaller ones of how they do this. High Springs, and also as far as the level of services they provide. High Springs, they have their own police and fire department. We used to have the municipal fire services agreement with, and it has some other terminology in that, but basically it said if you have a fire department, whether it's volunteer or whether it's a paid fire department or whatever it is, and you respond to a call outside your city limits, then you got reimbursed for it for going to that call. It was through an interlocal agreement that they started that. So what happened, and this was around the time that Hawthorne decided to go with their own fire department instead of contracting with the county, is that the county was starting to lock people down and not wanting to give, like High Springs was big time in the news for that. They wouldn't pay High Springs for going out to this area. So they'd send a truck from either Columbia County to come over here or from one of their other units that are staged over here to go to that. And so High Springs, you know, was locked down and didn't have that revenue coming in anymore for answering those calls. But when it deals with public service, it should just be whatever the closest vehicle is. You shouldn't put people's lives at risk. And so that's the whole reason why that started, and a lot of the reason why the MSTU is a big debate nowadays. So getting back to the Boundary Adjustments Acts and stuff like that. So that started in the early 90s. It's been in statute basically 24 years now. It's started out with very little areas, and it was by request to have your own urban reserve area. I forget what the other cities were that didn't have, I think there's two, maybe La Crosse. There's Hawthorne and one other city that didn't have an urban reserve area at all until 2006. And that's whenever we got ours in that dedicated area. The extraterritorial areas, which is something the League of Cities actually opposes, which is actually directly conflicts with any kind of personal interest they could have on it, is this lighter color area out here. All out here, this is all considered extraterritorial area. And a lot of times in the meetings you hear extraterrestrial and it gets confused. But these are extraterritorial areas, and this is unique to the Boundary Adjustment Act. That is the only one of these legislations that will have that in it. In the Urban Reserve Act, we get rid of that. So the League of Cities is actually proposing to get rid of the extraterritorial areas. We think it's just, our basic feeling is that this is just staking out your land, and who's to say that, you know, this is an exaggeration, but who's to say Micanopy can't provide those services there in the future better than Archer could? Or Gainesville, likewise. If Gainesville grew down here, who's to say that they couldn't provide their services in the future better than what they could, or in any of these areas? So we think it's just a land grab that they don't need to be doing that yet. We think that the urban reserves are the best part as far as planning out for the 10-year period. So that's the extraterritorial area is unique to the Boundary Adjustment Act. So this has been in existence. There's been some revisions. The basic change to this, as far as what you do to change your urban reserve areas. Say a city wanted to change their urban reserve areas. They would go and they would put together a plan, and they would say the urban reserve areas are supposed to be able to serve for the next 10 years to be urban in character. And there's a whole criteria here in Section 8, which is also in ours as well that I pass around. That is the same criteria for changing that part. But it basically says it has to be urban in character in the next 10 years. So, or it has to be, there's some provisions for having like state parks or something into it that, you know, you don't want state parks to become urban in character, but you could have them like Gainesville just brought in a lot of the Paynes Prairie area into their urban reserves. They just recently did that part. Well, they had a bigger appeal to a larger area over here is what they had. So they actually came down even further than what's on here. Well, it has to have some kind of character where you're planning on providing some kind of service to that area. For instance, there's a park here and a bike trail. There's the ACT property where they're having conferences and stuff like that. So they have some characteristic that they could potentially see there that they made an argument for and got that through the county commission. Yes, sir.
How would you be able to determine that something is going to be urban in character in 10 years?
That's a good question. And that's what the county commission currently has to decide on based upon the information that the requesting city gives to them. For instance, McNopie made a request. Their request was for, this was 2000, I think 2006 or 2001. And it had this whole area right here that they requested. Went out to Evanston and everything. Obviously, they got turned down because nobody could see McNopie. I mean, McNopie's one of the oldest settlements in Florida. They haven't grown in I don't know how long, and so how are they going to go out to that area in 10 years? Most of us have been the same size for that part. I could make an argument for Hawthorne. We've been this size for forever, for quite a bit of time, with the recent addition of this southern part of it, around the B&B and all that. But all this right here, all this right here, and all this right here, who's to say that's going to eventually be in 10 years? It's just the criteria that they use, and what you have to develop is actually an urban services report, which states, once you say that, okay, the trend is that people are starting to move in this area. There's more permits being carried in that area. Whatever you use as your criteria as far as a city that's trying to say why it's starting to be urban in character in that direction, or it could potentially be. Whether it's a 4-lane, whether it's a new school being built out somewhere, a new shopping center, whatever it may be, especially out here in Gainesville. They have all this on the western side of I-75 with the Celebration Point. They could make some, we see this coming, this could be urban in character. Of course, their urban reserve already comes way out here. Theirs in Newberry is actually touched, it's right there. So that's part of what they're trying to plan on. I'm not sure what they presented whenever they set these up originally. I don't know why the county drew these boundaries instead of drawing them somewhere else, because that was done before the city. The city's never made a request to them for that part. According to them, the city of Hawthorne had discussed bringing it out here to Noonan's Lake, and the city of Gainesville had discussed bringing it out here on the other side of Noonan's Lake in this part. And they had to be between them, and that was mid-2000s that basically said, no, you don't need to do that. So that was before I was ever involved, so I don't know how that exactly went, but that's what growth management has relayed to us as far as being their discussions. So you have to identify it being urban in character. You have to provide an urban services report, which is basically just saying, okay, you're going to provide, how are you going to provide police and fire, basically the core services. How are you going to provide water, wastewater, trash, electricity? How is all that going to be provided? In some of these cases, they'll say, oh, we'll provide them ourselves. When we get out that far, we have the capacity to be able to grow. Or they may say, like in Archer, everybody's on septic there. They'll say, well, whenever we grow out that far, there's still going to be septic until we bring in a sewer line and we're able to grow eventually and put everybody on sewer if that's what they decide to do.
Is that what we're hearing over there?
Yeah, the water.
You use the water. Yeah, that's just a water group.
Is that what it's looking at?
It's actually Commission Mark Bobby.
All
All right. And so that's some of what you have to present to them is by saying an urban services report as far as to be able to make it urban in character. And actually, Commissioner Mike Bowler sat through a lot of these, so feel free to chime in on. We're talking about how you establish something is going to be urban in character in the next 10 years. And so it's really a gray area, and you have to make an argument right now to the county commission for that. And so providing those services, whether it's electricity, most of the cities don't provide their own electricity services. Some of them do partial. I know Newberry has a partial. Gainesville does all, if not, most, if not all of theirs, because they do some even in the unincorporated areas. Yes, sir.
Okay, I'm developer A, and I want to build a big complex somewhere around Hawthorne. What would you as mayor want to see me bring to you to give justification for you to go to the county to ask to annex an area?
Well, that's for annexations. This is just the urban reserve areas is what we're talking about right now. We'll get to annexations in just a second. But this is the urban reserve areas, which what you want to try and do is you want to try and set up with your urban reserve areas basically a planning map. It doesn't mean much different to any of these, or anything different as far as taxing on the outside parts of these. All it does with the urban reserve areas is allow you, that's kind of a boundary. You can't annex outside of that. So that sets a boundary to where you can't go outside of. So this is a planning tool of saying, okay, when we start growing, we're going to know that we're going to have to plan for utilities. When we start putting utilities inside the city limits of Hawthorne, we're going to have to start planning for utilities eventually to be out in this area if they're going to be part of the future of Hawthorne, if that's what is decided here. So in Waldo, same thing, which they have a little bit different since now that they have wastewater services provided from GRU out here, but they still have to provide. You don't want to set up all your utilities going this direction if you're not ever going to grow out this direction. So you're going to plan your utilities to where you can eventually grow out in this direction, along with what the maps have. So that's the basic part of that. As far as the annexation part, you'll want to make sure it fits in. You know, if you have a developer, say you have a developer and it's agricultural land, or it's industrial land, you want to make sure whatever that zoning is in the county is going to fit with whatever is next to it in the city limits whenever it comes in. And if it doesn't, you're going to have to do a zoning change, which doesn't deal with the boundary adjustment at all. That's totally different with the comprehensive plans. So you're going to have to deal with that part of it. So you have to look at what infrastructure is going to be needed, what kind of power, what kind of water, what kind of wastewater. For instance, we just brought in a Love's truck stop up here at the, which is in the city limits, but it's dealing with infrastructure. Well, they have to have a certain flow of water to be able to address any kind of fire suppression for fuel, for the tire changing stations and all that. And so you have to be able to provide the infrastructure out there for the public safety of it. And so through a grant, we're providing the 12-inch water main that goes out there through the Department of Economic Opportunity. And then they're going to have to provide a staging tank to hold that, because even that 12-inch main is not going to be enough. So they're going to have to provide a staging tank for water holding for that. So that's some of the stuff you have to take into account as well.
So why doesn't Love Truck Stop pay for the water connection? Why did you have to get a grant?
Because, well, the state of Florida puts those out there as far as the Department of Economic Opportunity. And so it's an available grant to try and increase jobs within the city limits or within any area. It's available all the way across the state of Florida. And so we were one of 3 cities to actually be able to get it. And they're actually they're putting in $7 million into the property, and the state of Florida's putting $1.5 million into it. So that's just part of what they're trying to do as far as bringing, and they have to provide so many jobs for that before they're allowed to get it. So just because you want to put something out somewhere, if you don't provide the jobs there, then they can't justify it being there, or you don't increase that area, the blighted area.
How did they provide jobs?
What's that?
How did they provide jobs out there?
They're going to be providing 44 jobs. You have to provide, yeah, and if you don't provide them, you have to pay it back. So if you don't provide them, then you're going to be on the hook for that money.
And they have to tear that building down?
It's that building.
Yeah, it's already going. You don't have to tear it down, but that's what they're doing with that piece of property. Is they're putting $7 million into it to put that up there and to make it more like what their other properties are. So that's what they're doing with their own property. So that's kind of how the urban reserves are created. Is you appeal to the county for that. A city would come to the county and appeal to them for that, and the county would review it, and it'd go back to I guess they enter into some discussion and dictate whether that's adequate, whether it was less or more, or if there's something different that the county wants to see done there. Whether they need something changed with the urban services report or something different than that. Anything different, Commissioner Byerly?
You're doing great.
That sound good? All right, thank you. So that's how the urban reserve areas are created for that. Yes, sir.
Enclaves. Every time we try to do something in Hawthorne, we've always got this thing that creates an enclave. But yet, you look at a new map of Newberry, and they got enclaves period
Right.
all over the map.
I understand.
So how do we do that?
Well, we don't want to get into this. We want to stay away from this, right?
Mr. Barrett.
Yeah, but, and we kind of hit this a little bit earlier, is even though enclaves are against the law, how did the enclaves come into an existence? Mr. Bryant?
Oh, you're asking me a question?
Yeah, I'm just going because you've been on the commission for a while, and so you would know from personal history.
And this was before my time, actually.
Oh, was it?
Even though I was elected in 2000, Newberry and Alachua did a lot of very
Right.
aggressive annexation back in the 80s, I think. They created a lot of these issues, and part of what the Urban Reserve, Boundary Adjustment Act was intended to do was to provide an additional area or layer of protection against that kind of thing, in addition to the default state law. So those things, they got into being before there was really a lot of oversight into how annexations could be done. The idea of enclaves weren't really seen as a problem back then, I guess, but since then, trying to provide services in those little pockets of area in the county is a real problem.
And we went over the fire MSTUs and how to provide services in there and everything else, and the enclaves are actually against all of these proposals. So it's illegal in all of these, and they're still created, but basically an enclave is only going to be allowed if there's not a challenge against it, right? Basically.
My understanding is that the enclave is not allowed to be,
Right.
period.
Right, yeah, they're in all the laws, not allowed to be provided, period, but they still happen.
Well, you mean existing ones.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they still happen basically because,
And once they're in, you're kind of grandfathered,
Right.
because the people there didn't ask to be encircled by the city.
Right.
If they want to stay in the county, they get to stay in the county.
and so we went over the compulsory annexation that y'all reviewed at your meeting, and trying to figure out when that would happen, if it would happen, and that's just kind of gotten to the back table right now, right?
Yeah.
No mandatory,
Well, this isn't the problem. I mean, let's get real. Newberry's got 53 square miles of city now,
Yeah.
with 5,000 people in it.
Mm-hmm.
So what you're doing, all this finagling, is you're creating a mini LA in a rural area, because all this is sprawl. I mean, 5,000 people in 53 square miles. Gainesville's only got 60 square miles. It's got 125,000 people.
Right.
So, that's, I don't care what you call it on paper or anything else, that's not urban.
Right, well,
It's
this is,
suburban, but it's not even well laid out.
right, but this is what has happened, even underneath the Boundary Adjustment Act. This is all what's happened, whether it's state law, Boundary Adjustment Act, whatever has happened is what we have now.
Well, let's
And-
just hit it.
Well, yeah, but do you think it's gonna be any better when you have more authority at a lower level, where you don't have the capability to do a lot of the studies that you would need to do to make it work? That's my point.
Yeah.
Because I mean, and I know that
Well, that's-
the county gets a lot of bad raps, and
Yeah.
I've rapped it before myself
Yeah.
and things. But on the other hand, they've got a lot of professional people in there
Mhm.
that are trained to look at those things, and dare say Hawthorne's isn't, and Newberry isn't, and none of these towns, Waldo, La Crosse, 300 people up there. I mean,
Well, Hawthorne actually has a pretty professional staff,
well, I'm not saying you're
Because-
but when you start rolling
listen,
out like,
because we contract with the county, so that's
oh,
how.
okay, all right, but I mean, if you contract with the county,
Yeah, but that's how.
why do you even change the system then?
But that's how we have, that's for growth management, that's for something different than what this is, that's for,
Yeah, it all
planning and
comes
zoning.
together
and
as a
that.
problem.
Right. But what we're, and we'll get into the differences and what we're proposing and what has happened, but I'm just trying to give a background of what it is right now. I know you wanna get real with it, right down to the nitty gritty, but we have to understand the history.
So my main question is the reason you have those enclaves is because those particular property owners had the right to say no to being annexed into the city?
Technically, yes. I mean, if it was a referendum, they'd have a vote. But if it was, say Newberry wanted to, say this whole parcel, say Newberry city limits cut off right here originally, and they wanted to have a referendum for this area here. Well, if they had a vote, then either all of this would come in or none of this would come in. It wouldn't piecemeal come in like that. So it had to come through voluntary annexations or miniature referendums for that. And that's part of what I think we had the discussion on trying to get to, and staff is looking back on. I don't think they've came back with anything new, have they?
No.
About what is a minimum number of area to have like a referendum. Say you have 5 parcels. Well, technically you can have a referendum over those 5 parcels, and you have to have, is it 60% you have to have? majority? Is it just simple majority? So I haven't dealt with any of those, so I'm not sure what that is. But to come into the city. So, and it's by, it's not by property owners, it's by actual registered voters, is that correct? I'm pretty sure it's by just registered voters. I think that's the way.
I'm not sure.
I think that's the way all the acts are used by registered voters in it. So even if you're a property owner and not a registered voter, that's more of a reason to register, then you would have to actually be part of that, that part of that vote. And you wouldn't actually come into the city unless there is a majority vote, and then all or nothing would come in. So basically this has come in through voluntary annexation or piecemeal referendums. So that's how it came in. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, those enclaves happened in the 80s. The Boundary Adjustment Act is from 1990.
Yeah, but some of these
You
also
couldn't do
created.
that now.
Yeah, but some of the, yeah, you still could.
How's
It's
that?
still, even back then, the enclaves were still in state law, that you couldn't create enclaves. And so you can still do it now if there's not any opposition to it. Someone would have to protest against it, which is normally the county would have to protest against it, correct?
Yeah, this is kind of a gray area.
Yeah, exactly.
I think technically those things should not have happened.
Right,
But someone was asleep at the wheel,
exactly.
and they went in, and once they're approved, there's no going back. That seems to be
Yeah,
the
that's,
history that we're getting.
right.
So you've got an enforcement problem.
That's part of it, yes ma'am. And what's kind of being proposed as far as the change, and I'll go ahead and get into that part now, is what the county's proposing to change as far as the Boundary Adjustment Act. So right now, if you took your proposal to the county and you wanted to change your urban reserve area and the county shot it down, then your appeal would be to the county commission, and then after that, it would be back to the court system if you want to change that. So what the county, and the reason why I say that is because that's one of the biggest differences between the two acts that we're presenting, they're presenting, not the repeal. The repeal is basically none of these, it's just state law. So what the county is actually looking to do is streamline the process. So right now, if you want to annex into a city, you have to provide an urban services report. Whether it's voluntary, whether it's a referendum, you have to provide an urban services report. The urban services report is basically going to say how you're going to provide those services in a more direct fashion than what the urban services original part statement of services is for the urban reserve area. So the urban services report is you're annexing a piece of property. You're going to have to tell them exactly what lines are available as far as water lines, electrical lines. You have to tell them if there's a certain threshold met as far as number of acres brought in, then you're going to have to tell them the cost of those services. You're going to have to figure out the cost of what it's going to provide. And actually, county staff has came back and said they'd even provide that service of creating the urban services report to the smaller cities. So they said they'd provide that for that. But that's required, state law is required on any referendum annexations. It's not required on voluntary annexations. The theory behind that is if you're planning on coming in the city, you know what services are typically there that you're wanting to be a part of that city. So that's the theory behind it. So it's an extra step and layer that you're going to have to do that normally requires more time and more hearings and putting that together, or staff time and an added cost. So what the county has done is said, okay, well, instead of having to have this done for voluntary annexations in a held hearing and actually voted on twice, so a public hearing where you have first reading and a second reading, we're going to cut that down to where basically you just submit the urban services report just for informational purposes only, and you're not creating where you have to have 2 readings on it, basically. So you don't have to have 2 readings on the urban services report for a voluntary annexation. You would still have to have it on a referendum, no matter what. No matter which act you go with, you still have to have it on a referendum.
And Alachua County staff recommends that.
Yes, and actually, Alachua County Commission recommends that too, right? And we voted on it. And so that's the current part for that. The other part that they recommended was addressing the enclaves. The enclaves was redefining what an enclave is. And so in that manner, you could theoretically, in my opinion, what it does is create more enclaves by just changing the name of the enclaves. And Commissioner Byerly, you can correct me on this as well. But changing the name of it to where for instance, we'll use Newberry, because I know they have a proposal out here for annexation that's been shot down because there's one property owner that's out here, and I may be pointing at the wrong place. It may be right here closer to town, near the Canterbury area. But anyways, there's one property owner that won't allow them to annex the whole block. And so basically what they're going to say is that the services will be provided to that property, and they'll come up with ways to provide those services through like an interlocal agreement, which is similar to Part 2 of state law. But they'll be able to annex the other properties that are kept from being a part of the city for that. And so that's another county proposal by growth management, is to do that, is to redefine to where you can create city limits around a piece of property again, and it just not be called an enclave, even though on paper it looks similar to an enclave.
That sounds
I'm so lost.
We can go back, we don't want to lose them back.
valid. You can be annexed involuntarily if you've got less than 10 acres, is that what you said?
That's state law.
And what we have now is,
What we have right now is Boundary Adjustment
Yeah, I
Act,
know,
which is
but-
not state law, and you can't involuntarily be annexed at all, period.
one housing,
One house,
Right.
none,
okay,
none,
just about.
none, yeah. So that's just state law, and there's not very many people that do that because it's very unpopular that you don't want people to be part of your city that aren't happy to be part of your city.
Not really,
Well, I don't know. So,
unless they got a lot of money to pay really high taxes.
Matt,
yes,
I got a question, it may not be involved, but this Love's Truck Stop over here.
uh-huh,
Let's say you put a 12-inch line, we got a grant for this, right?
mm-hmm,
Well, 10 years from now, you gotta move the city even farther, annex on in. Okay, when you annex, does that mean that you're gonna provide water?
not necessarily.
Or like a business, for instance, if it's commercial property?
Right, not necessarily. That's what you try and state in your urban services report whenever you first plan on any kind of annexations, is what type of how you're going to provide services to there. Whether it's going to be, because a lot of places, some places aren't feasible to provide water and sewer to. That's they dealt with that before I was on the commission with the last referendum that was over here around the sewer plant, where it was turned down, the last one. And that's actually this area in here. No, I'm sorry. This area. Yeah, right here. Sorry, this area right here. Try to do a referendum annexation there. But of course, that was in the early 2000s, I think, Mr. Brother, was that right? Mid to early 2000s. And biggest thing with them was they thought they were going to have to be hooked up to the sewer and the water line. Well, the sewer and the water line aren't provided out there, so you don't have to hook up to any of that until it's provided out there and it's feasible for your property. So if you have a 10-acre piece of property and your property is on the back part of it and the water line's on the very front, well, that's not too feasible, cost efficient for you to hook up to that. But if you have a business and you want to move your business up towards the front of your parcel or subdivide, it has to go through planning and zoning and all that, then that's when you start looking at your urban services report as far as what's going to be out there, what you're going to be planning on, what they know to expect when and if they come into the city limits of Hawthorne. For instance, just using an exact one, just north of town, there is actually a block that's up here. It was before you get to L&S trailers, and what's that?
4 acres.
Yeah, there's 4 acres there, and there's still some of that that's in the county. Your shop's in the county right now. Yeah, it's in the county, not in the city limits. So there's still some areas over there that aren't, and people don't know it just by driving by, but it's in the county, and so they don't have to hook up to any of the city services. If we ran a line down there, then by state law, then you'd have to hook up if it's feasible and cost effective. And then it'd be a similar instance of what GRU is doing as far as providing services in the unincorporated area. Yes, sir.
Cost effective to who? The county, the city?
Well, you have to show a hardship, just like in any other kind of hearing. They have a hearing that you have to provide a hardship for. So if you're not able to go there, what's the name of the panel that they always do to review? It's basically just
I
all,
should know, but I can't think of it.
yeah, it's basically, there's a panel, there's a state panel for it, you have to show a financial hardship too, of why you shouldn't have to hook up to water or sewer.
Yeah, the reason why I'm asking, I understand the hookup fee at the city of Gainesville is $25,000 now.
I don't know that.
Yeah, but if you're a landowner, you've got 10 acres, you're sitting there with a well and septic, then it's not cost effective to the homeowner to
Right.
hook up to the city water and sewer.
And so you
So
show.
who's cost effective?
Well, you'd have to show it to that panel. No, you'd have to show it to that panel. And a lot of times the city can't, for instance, like the city of Hawthorne a few years ago before we just expanded our wastewater treatment plant with a drying box to be able to not have to carry that over to the GRU to dump. We actually make a cake mixture now to dump. But before we expanded what we did, we didn't have the availability to be able to expand our sewer and take on more people. So this housing development that was on Holden Park over here proposed, it was before my,
650 homes.
yeah, but how many years ago was it started?
Oh, a number of years, 8 or 9,
Yeah,
10 years ago.
But they had to show that they had the capability of bringing that on, the space for their service to bring that on before they could even make that part of it. So otherwise they'd have to, if it's not cost effective for the city, then the city wouldn't have to provide services to them either. So just because you're in the city limits, you don't have to provide, so the city wouldn't have to provide services if it isn't cost effective for them.
When Mr. Higginbottom was allowed to bring in all that land over at the lake that I used to own, because he wanted to, so he could sell 1 acre lots.
Yeah.
Who was that cost effective to?
Well, that's not providing any services. They don't, none of them are hooked up to the water or the sewer, right? None of them are hooked up to city water and sewer. So they
I know that
they
whole
could be
thing
in
was
the,
done just so he was allowed to change
yeah.
that land that was supposed to have been always protected into 1 acre lots along that creek, and this little orange creek.
Yeah. I don't know, that was before me, so I'm not familiar with
You were
the,
here.
well,
I spoke.
I was in the city limits, but I wasn't on the city commission whenever that got brought in.
What year
Well,
did you
that's
start on the city?
2009. So that was before my time that they brought all that in over here, that you're talking about behind the.
Yeah, when I bought that land, I was told from water management that that land should never be touched because it was owned by water management.
Yeah, and it can, well,
And he divided it
Yeah.
into 1 acre lots.
yeah, and that's the development part of it as well. But it can also, just like I said earlier, you can have a state park or anything else, environmental sensitive area in your city limits, and it still not be developed as well, just depending on, if they want it to be part of the city limits or not. So it can still be in the city limits, but the subdividing and development, I'm not sure on that. how
But we
that
already did it. We already got away with it.
Okay.
We
Yeah,
got,
the re-
those
the
are 6
reason I
acre
asked-
lots, aren't they?
No, they're 1 acre lots along the.
The reason I asked is, you said that Love's truck stop, the water line wasn't big enough, it was 12-inch line.
Mhm.
Well, the reason I asked this is, let's say that you got a business wants to bring a car wash next to the Love's, for instance.
Right.
If the line isn't big enough for Love's, how's it gonna be big enough for the car wash?
Well, what that is for the fire suppression part of it. It's big
Okay.
enough. It's big
Okay.
enough for the regular services.
Okay,
But no matter what line you ran out there for that level of fire suppression, yeah, it would be. That's why they have the holding tanks. So the 12-inch line, and it takes engineers to figure out what capacity they're going to have to fight, so many, however many stations they have, bays they have for the tire changing and all that, taking that into effect, and how much fuel they keep on site to be able to fight that as well.
so as far as a normal operating
Yeah.
business,
They
it's
already
not
have-
an issue.
Right, and they already have a line out there for the normal part of it, so
Okay.
they already have a lot of that already out there. This is just in addition to it, and I'm sure that could probably be added on as well with that 12-inch line. It's just not deeded just to them. We could actually bring other stuff off of it as well if needed, because it's just for basically a one-time fill up
Right.
that reservoir there. So, all right, so that's the main differences in what the county's proposing right now is the speeding up the not annexation process, speeding up yes, it is an annexation, I'm sorry, annexation process instead of being about 6 months, which is what we took for the city of Hawthorne to bring in the Little Orange Creek Nature Park, which is city-owned property. It was in the unincorporated area. Part of it's even in Putnam County, but it's not in the city over there, and so it's still in the unincorporated area. But it took us 6 months to bring that into the city limits of Hawthorne because of the hearings, the urban services report, and the other advertisements that you have to do. So we have to go through the same thing that regular property owners have to do as well to be in the city. So, So speeding up the annexation process from 6 months, basically, I think they figured it was gonna be 4.5 months. They said they're gonna cut about a month and a half off.
I thought it was cut it in half, I could be wrong.
So somewhere in the 3 to 4.5 months, it cut it down. And then the county offered to provide the urban services report to the smaller cities, free of charge for doing that. And addressing the enclaves. So whether it creates more or whatever it does, it redefines it and addresses the enclaves. And that's what the county proposal has been. Have anything else to add to that, Commissioner Bradley, that I overlooked? All right, so the other part of it is what the League of Cities, which is the 9 municipalities, is one representative from each municipality, which the representative from each municipality is appointed by their governing body. So the League of Cities doesn't have any kind of say on who actually represents which city. They're appointed by their governing body. I'm the current president of the Alachua County League of Cities, and Micanopy came to us actually they started talking about it in 2011, and then finally brought it to us with actually some, I guess, urgency, wanting to try and get something changed for them, is mainly for this area here is what they were discussing. You can see that their city limits butt up against their urban reserve boundaries. And I said that was around 2006 that they made that request. Is that correct, Commissioner Brierly?
During the last round, I thought it was a little later than that.
It was a time before the last one. So the last one was 2011, they made a request, and so it was 2006, I believe.
Well, then they actually, at that time, they made several requests.
Right.
They wanted to expand their extraterritorial reserve all the way up to Payne Prairie.
Right.
And they wanted their urban reserve to go over to and include Evanston.
Evanston, right. That's what I was explaining earlier too, sir. Is that they had a large request to change out here. And whether it was through breakdown negotiations or lack of negotiations by one or the other party, they basically they remained unchanged, right? They didn't change at all. Is that correct?
After we had a room full of angry people from Texas saying they didn't want to be in the urban reserve.
Right.
And we rejected that as well as the expansion to Payne Prairie. And at that point, we could just withdrew.
Okay, so they ended up withdrawing. But what they're wanting to do, the mayor there, Richard Shutterly is the mayor, and he's the appointed person by his commission to serve on the Alachua County League of Cities, is they have an area that's just, I guess, west-northwest, and we were getting hung up on this, so I apologize for that. So it's kind of west-northwest over here on 441 and the road that goes back there to I-75. And they have an area over here that they're wanting to annex into their city to provide a well, a water well for their city. And they're not able to even annex it in as far as being city-owned property because it's outside the urban reserve. So even if the city owns it and it's outside the urban reserve, you can't bring that into the city limits. Is that fair to say?
Isn't that area in Payne Prairie State Reserve?
Yes, it's part of the state. It's part of the state property. So state property, they're actually wanting to put a request into the state of Florida for requests for that. Did they say it was 40 acres?
You know more about that than I do, Matt.
I think it was 40 acres. Mayor Shutterly said in our meeting that they were wanting to try and bring in. And so it's not that they're developing it; they're just wanting it to be a well area for their city. And so, but there's a couple pieces of property along here like that they want to bring in as well. Just have the capability, if they want to, for the urban reserve area, if these property owners want to become part of the town of Micanopy. And currently they provide fire services, and then the county provides law enforcement, but Micanopy doesn't participate in MST. Is that correct?
That's correct.
You're a local resident as well. I keep forgetting that part. Right. So, local resident as well. And so that's what had stirred a lot of this and brought this to the Alachua County League of Cities is Mayor Shutterly. Yes,
what is the urgency in 2015 of that, when 2016 you're supposed to have your review anyway?
It started in the discussion started in 2011. So it's not that there's urgency. We're talking about because we're hearing this now. This happened over a 4-year period so far.
Well, I understand. But I mean, with the normal process would come up in a year anyway.
Right.
I'm just trying to get a feel.
Well, and this is what they're wanting to change part of, and this is where we'll get to that part. Is instead of them appealing, what the suggestion is is to go with state law for annexation parts of it. So get rid of the first, instead of 14 pages, it'd be down to 3 pages, is what it'd be. So the 3 pages would deal with it. You still could only annex if it's in an urban reserve area. You still have to maintain those urban reserve areas by the Urban Reserve Act, which basically frees them all as they are now. The discussion is to have, and the proposal has been by the League of Cities, is to create a panel, a board, representing the municipalities and the county on it. Right now, the proposal on paper says 1 city, 1 vote. Or 1 government, 1 vote. So everybody would have 1 vote on there, and this was actually brought up by the biggest city of all of them is Gainesville. So you would think they'd be the least favorite to have that, and they're actually the ones that crafted this. And the reason that is because they wanted that to be independent people making a decision. If you have 2 cities battling each other, or if you have a city and a county, or 3 cities battling each other, you have some independent people that aren't directly affected with it that can make hopefully a logical decision. And that's just your urban reserve areas. This isn't dealing with annexations. This is dealing with just setting these urban reserve boundaries. And then if you didn't get a supermajority, it would stay the same. If you got a supermajority, then it would change. There is an appeal process where you do it to the state appeals court. You have not appeals court. You have a hearing officer assigned to it, and they would make a decision by an affected party. And we're actually changing that affected party to where it's more inclusive in the county, to where the county can actually do that part. We actually also changed it and are in discussions right now. We're set to have a meeting in the next 2 weeks of changing the composition of that board as well. So because the county doesn't feel that they're given adequate representation on it, what the proposal now by one of the league members has been to try and change that to where it's 2 members from the county, 2 members from, I don't mean to point at Newberry, 2 members from the county as a whole, 2 members from the city of Gainesville, and then 3 members at large from the other 8 municipalities.
Okay. So this board will be comprised of how many municipalities we got?
We have 8 municipalities.
So this board would have,
I mean, we have 9 total municipalities, including Gainesville. Yes.
okay, so this board would have 9 members plus.
No. This new proposal. I'm sorry. The current proposal is 1 member from each city, which is 9 members, and then 1 member from the county. So that makes 10. You'd have to have a supermajority. So you'd have to have 8 votes in the affirmative to be able to change any urban reserve areas.
Supermajority quorum is the same thing?
What's that? No. Well, a quorum, and it's written in here, you can have a quorum to address policy issues as far as how you organize yourself in meetings and discussing things. But you still have to have a supermajority. A quorum is just it'd be 5 out of 10 cities. So you could have discussion. I mean, 5 out of 10 members. That's including the cities and the county. But you can't vote on anything because you have to have a supermajority, which is 8 affirmative votes. So you have to have 8 affirmative votes, and that's 8 out of the 10. So above 75.
Let me ask a question.
Yes, sir.
Because I got a feeling Ben Franklin's just rolling up in his car. I mean, here's the thing. You've got La Crosse with 300 people that 1 vote. You've got Micanopy with about 700, 800 people, 1 vote. You got Gainesville, 125,000, 1 vote.
Understand?
Hawthorne, everybody's got 1 vote.
Understand? Yep.
You got 100,000 people in the unincorporated county who are going to be impacted if you broaden the reserve areas. They have 0 votes. 40% of the county is left out of the whole process.
Right. And
That's
that's
crazy.
and that's why the city's going back. The League of Cities is going back, and we had a representative actually from Waldo present the idea to have a 2-2-3. It was actually a 2-2-2 at first, and then we changed it to a 2-2-3. That we have an odd number of people, and so it'd be 2 members from the county as a whole. And is this the first time you've heard about this, or second time? Second time. 2 members from the county as a whole, 2 members from Gainesville, city of Gainesville, and 3 members at large. And at first, actually was discussed here with the Alachua County League of Cities met here, and county, I think it was Mr. Lockman, was it?
Lockney.
Lockman was here, Steve Lockman was here, and we discussed supermajority versus simple majority. And he liked the idea of still having the supermajority still, which is fine with us. That's if it makes sense, it makes sense. This is
So
just
you
the
got
first
seven,
floor.
you're going from 9 to 10 to 7.
From 10 to 7, and giving 2 representatives to the county, and 2 representatives. So the majority of the whole thing is going to be represented by the county and the city of Gainesville. So you have 4 votes by the county and the city of Gainesville together.
But the county and the city of Gainesville together make up, I mean, those other 8 municipalities make up 25,000 people.
Right.
The county's 250,000 miles.
Right.
So,
Understand. Okay.
What is the purpose of the League of Cities?
The League of Cities is just getting people together. It's representative for each, 1 member from each city, as far as the Alachua County League of Cities, and discussing issues here locally in Alachua County that pertain to local issues as far as home rule decisions, and all that entails is being able to, basically the argument is that you address issues differently in Hawthorne than how you would deal with it in like Miami or Jacksonville or even Gainesville. That each one of these cities address, and we see this how it went through the fire services, how they provide different services to each other. Not only that, but they also provide educational stuff for city clerks, also provide educational stuff to city managers, any staff, public works staff, provide ethics training for the entire state. That's now a requirement by state law.
But if we have a board of county commissioners, aren't they supposed to be taking care of the county?
Well, yeah,
So
and
what
this
is-
is
so
an
the League of
association,
The League of Urban Cities, or the League of Cities?
Florida League of Cities, and
Is
Alachua
a
County League
whole
of Cities.
separate entity?
Yeah, it's an
Do they sit together
association.
and meet and decide how to change laws around what the county
They-
wants to do?
They don't change that. It's just like the county. County has the Florida County Association. So it's an association. They don't make laws or
Kind of like
anything
the
else.
Chamber of Commerce?
Well, it's kind of like any kind of association. Chamber of Commerce, PTA, Athletic Association. It's an association like anything else.
That participates in lobbying for
Yep.
issues that benefit the organization.
That
And the
benefits their
organization's
members.
primary purpose is to create revenue for cities and municipalities.
Not necessarily. It's to not lose money. So, however you want to do it. Oh, Commissioner Carlton, now give me some more.
Explain that 3 at large.
Okay.
Is that from the whole county?
That's from the 8 remaining cities. So the League of Cities would vote on other people as far as from these 8 remaining, the 8 outlying cities.
So each one of those would have a vote?
No, there would be only 3 members out of all these. So you would take.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify that.
Yeah. So it could be somebody from Newberry, it could be somebody from Alachua, somebody from High Springs, or they could spread out however.
So these
So
people aren't elected, so they're not really.
No, they are
enforcing-
elected.
Oh, they are?
they are elected.
I elect the League of City leader?
No. These are elected officials of their cities. Just like I'm elected in my city. And Mayor Bill Conrad represents Newberry. Mayor Sue Weller represents High Springs. Mayor Gib Kerper represents Alachua. Used to be vice mayor and now mayor Doug Jones represents Archer.
And so that when you guys travel to these meetings, like in Miami and wherever, Washington, the city pays for your travel?
Some of them do, some of them don't. For the first few, I paid all on. Right now, the league is the city of Hawthorne, and each one of these handle it a little bit different as far as how they budget that. Some of them don't even go. Some of them have the ethics training actually online because they can't attend these. So these are different social stuff, and I have the website also on my card. I'll give it to you later, where you can go in there and see the different things that they provide. One thing that we just did, and I was telling Lord about it earlier, is the FEMA flood maps. And the Florida County Association also worked with us on that, who also fights for home rule. The counties do, because the county is a local government as well. And so they want to make the decision here how it affects Alachua County versus how Duval County addresses there, or Escambia County, or any other county addresses there. They want to have the decision making here as a county to do that. So that's basically the gist of it. Last year, we say the state of Florida was the most impacted by the FEMA flood maps. What FEMA did was they took flood maps and a mapping software and created a contour and just said this is where the flood areas are. They didn't take into any of the other historical data that the cities have or anything else as far as water mitigation or anything else.
See where the flood really was.
Right. And so you have properties that were high and dry and have been high and dry for forever, or out of the 100-year floodplain and everything else, and they were paying astronomical fees for flood insurance because FEMA said that they would have to. And so that was challenged this past session with the U.S. Congress. And local officials went up there and lobbied their legislatures and told them that, you know, that's going to hurt our cities, that's going to hurt our city residents. And so that's how it ended up not passing, by keeping that away. So, Mr. Moore, first now communicate.
Okay, if I understand what's going on here, you have the county commission that makes the decisions on the reserve areas of the county. You
Right.
want to change that by this Reserve Act that you're proposing to have basically the cities make that decision.
Well, we want to have it where everybody's at the table and not just the cities.
Yeah, but first of all, you wanted the cities, and now it's being negotiated out where the county has a say in it.
No, the county was at it at first as well. The county had a seat at the table as well. So we had it where everybody was at the table making a decision with a supermajority for this.
So you
For the urban
have
reserve
basically,
areas.
you have the city of Gainesville at basically 25,000 people.
125.
125,000, telling the other 100,000 what they should or shouldn't do as far as the Reserve Act is concerned.
Well, that was, and they're just one vote on it as well. So the city of Gainesville was just one vote on it as well. Everybody would have been just one vote with what is on your paper that you have in front of you that I passed out. Is just a current one with one city, one vote, and the county has one vote as well in supermajority. But what we're going to meet, since we've had the presentation at the legislative delegation hearing, the concession that the league is trying to make, the representatives from the cities is trying to make, is having it 2-2-3. So where you have, you change that composition, you give more representation to the county, the city of Gainesville, and then you have the the 3 from the 8 municipalities that are remaining.
So tell me, why, as a citizen living in the unincorporated county, this is better for me?
Why it's better for you?
Yes.
Because you'll have, well, one, you'll have an appeal factor to be able to come back to. We actually include the individual as part of the appeal factor, but also you'll be able to come to local leaders as well instead of just the county. And so this is just setting up the urban reserve area. This isn't annexation, so if you're a property owner, you're still going to be annexed the same way that you have been annexing. The only change is that now it's going to be state law instead of with the instead of the Boundary Adjustment Act, so it's not going to take as long for you to get into the city.
You're assuming
Voluntary.
that we want to be in a city.
Well, no, you can still appeal and stay out of it as well. So, and right now, you're, with the county proposing changing the definition of an enclave, you'd be better off either in the state law, if you didn't want to be an enclave, you'd be better off in a state law or even in the Urban Reserve Act by not having that either way as far as being part of an enclave. So, Commissioner Brownlee, I see your hand go
Can
up.
I just offer so that everyone
Sure.
is clear, the majority of the county commission anyway does not support any change to the enclave law which would allow for an involuntary annexation of anyone.
Right.
I thought I heard you say something.
No.
You wouldn't be better off than under state law because they're saying you can't force
But
it.
you would still be an enclave. With changing what I was saying, we already addressed the part about the compulsory annexation. That's not going to be allowed in any of that. What you have is the urban reserve area. Changing the definition, not urban reserve, the enclave. Changing the definition of the enclave it could theoretically create more enclaves by changing the definition of it. It wouldn't be called an enclave anymore, but on the map it would look like an enclave by changing the definition of it.
But the intent is to reduce the total area which is currently enclave.
Right. That's the intent.
Ironically, you can't take an area that is within an enclave and allow it to annex even voluntarily if by doing so you would cut off another piece of land. So even though the effect would be to reduce the total enclave area, you're technically creating a new enclave. That's the legality we're trying to get past.
Right.
I have another question, and this.
1 second, Katie was first, and then I'll come back to you.
I'm not good at math.
No problem.
Go too fast.
No problem, I'm sorry. Slow me down if I do.
We got how many municipalities? I just want to get glasses.
9 total
We got 9
municipalities.
Okay. Y'all want to institute a board to vote on this rather than have the county commissioners vote on a urban reserve areas, correct?
Right.
Okay. And on that board would be how many people from each municipality? How many votes would that
The current proposal you have right there with you, that the league has actually voted on, is 10 members. That's the current proposal, but we're actually proposing to change that from 10 down to 7.
Wow.
So,
So,
we-
okay.
one second, let's
I'm
finish
not-
hers
I'm not
first.
smart enough.
No problem, no problem.
Down to 7, what now?
Down to 7 members. So instead of being 10 members, we're discussing, it hasn't been voted on, is to take it down to 7 members. And when we
Total.
and 7 members total. And when you reduce it to 7, then you also give the county another vote, and then give the city of Gainesville another vote. So that's 4 from the largest populations, which is the unincorporated area and the city of Gainesville. And then you'd have 3 remaining that would be from the other 8 municipalities. So there'd be 5 of them that wouldn't get a vote on this urban reserve board at all. So
Okay. The representation is still unfair.
I agree.
So,
It's
so the Renegade and Micanopy, they're not gonna let them on it because.
It's
It's like, no, we're not even a city.
The representation, it's still really, really unbalanced. Because people that would say in the city of Hawthorne, the city of Archer, whatever, are represented twice. They get to elect their city people and county people. I don't live in the city of Hawthorne, I'm unincorporated. I only vote once.
Well, it's even
So
worse
I'm
than
not
that.
being proper, I'm not being represented properly at all, even according to this adjusted.
Right.
So I'm not liking this board thing. It's not fair to me.
Okay.
Well, it's also
I'm
proportional.
good.
All right.
I was just concerned is why would we lower the amount of people voting, because that way we can leave out some of these renegades are gonna always say no. And it's gonna make it easier for you to pass these kind of things.
Not necessary. Anytime you have the county and the city of Gainesville involved, there's no telling where it goes, right, with the MTPO?
Well, I mean, what's the purpose of lowering it from one representative of each little city just to,
The biggest purpose of doing that, and the reason, and this is just one proposal. We also had another proposal that had to expand it from 10 members to 13 members. So, I mean, there's been all kinds of things since that legislative delegation hearing that have been talked about, thrown out about trying to figure out another proposal to be able to get something that works versus going to full out repeal. We don't want to go to full out repeal because it gets rid of these urban reserve areas. So I'll get to that part in a second with what's been actually proposed. So,
I don't know then.
Well, since when do
I
we
don't know
not
the
want a
answer.
full out repeal?
huh?
Since when does the league not want a full out repeal of the boundary adjustment?
The league has taken an official stance of not wanting to full out repeal since last February, I think it was, when we came up with this Urban Reserve Act, and we didn't have the time to get it through at the last session a year ago. So that it's been since then. You had a question?
Who does the county represent?
The county?
Do they represent the urban area?
They represent the entire county. They don't make decisions as far as, because of home rule, they don't make decisions as far as how cities address municipal issues here directly. But they make at-large policy decisions for the entire county, basically is the easiest way to put
Well,
it.
why not give them more votes? Then they're technically represent the urban area more than they are, the municipalities.
Well, that was the reasoning to give them more say-so percentage-wise in the 7-member district. And getting back to your part about going down to 7, the reason why that was there was a lot of decisions as far as with meetings and stuff that people couldn't make it, and so we'd only have 4 or 5 people showing up anyways. And so most of these people in these,
They can't drive to Gainesville for me?
well, if they're like me, an elected official in a small town, this isn't your primary job. You have to work full-time as well. So some of these don't even get paid at all. They don't even get $200 supplement, $100 supplement. They don't get anything. So they're having to take their time off work to go and meet at a meeting on an issue that may not even directly address them. So that was the reasoning that he had proposed to go down to 222, and then we just made it 223 as far as being an odd number, so you don't have that hang up on a vote, even or anything else. But with a supermajority, you change that anyways. So that was the reason for that. The other part with 13, I think it was 13 people, was adding more county commissioners to it, and I think it was 1 more Gainesville and 2 more counties what it was adding. But then you get into the part of having a kind of like an MTPO that I alluded to earlier, where you have a huge board and a lot of people want to say something at one time, and you can't really get a whole lot done because you have too many people. So there's a balance between having too many and too few, and trying to find that happy medium.
Well, when I look at this map, the only area I see that's not already colored is Hawthorne. So it looks like Hawthorne is the one who wants to bring in more land, and everybody else is already all for it,
What now?
except for maybe Micanopy. Look at the white on the map, it's only over
Yeah.
here.
But that's not the, yeah, but that's just without, you're also looking at extraterritorial areas over here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Those are all colored in.
Yeah, but those aren't part of the urban reserve areas. This is the decisions for the urban reserve areas that we're talking about, that a board would make a decision. The county commission would make the decision on that. So the Urban Reserve Act gets rid of all this extraterritorial areas right here.
So the light colors around, the lighter yellow around.
Right
Hawthorne
here,
is
all that
land
would be gone.
That you're trying to get, you want to not be in
Not,
the city of Hawthorne?
well, none of this is in the city of Hawthorne.
And in the future, you want it to be?
No, none of this is in the city of Hawthorne. None of this is all extraterritorial area. The county has put it out as basically staked out area for future growth. How do they define extraterritorial area?
They give it a year limit, but it's essentially the area within which the city is expected to one day be able to annex, even though they can't currently
Right.
within that time frame.
But it's outside the
No one
10-year
else-
period,
no one
right?
else- No one else can try to annex into that city's territory.
Right. So it's basically a state map, kind of the same thing over here. And so that's what, ironically, the cities are, which has been pointed out at the county commission meeting, it's ironic that cities are wanting to get rid of this because it's their staked out territory, so to speak. In our opinion, it shouldn't be staked out. You should only have the 10-year area for planning purposes, because you don't need to plan much further than 10 years for infrastructure parts like that. Same thing here. I mean, this is all just urban reserve area. So this would still be here. This wouldn't be here. This wouldn't be here. So that's a lot of what the League of Cities is saying, is this area here, you can leave that to where eventually you have this panel. And Commissioner Browder, I think, has been in some of these discussions with between Alachua and Gainesville, right? Turkey Creek, around that area, about which city they want to be a part of. So as these cities get closer, we're fortunate over here, we're not having a battle with any other cities. Waldo is a little bit, and Micanopy is good as well, but when you're over here and you start battling with other cities and other counties, and not other counties, but the county, and try and figure out which part's going to stay unincorporated, especially when you're dealing with a large neighborhood, whether they want to be part of the city of Archer or part of the city of Newberry, or where they want to be at. And that's when you get into the land grab that's in South Florida that we're trying to prevent from by having these urban reserve areas. And so that's why, and back to Katie's point about when the cities started changing their position as far as full-out repeal, in 2009, was it, that they had the legislation go to state legislator, and it got thrown off by two municipalities, two municipal representatives, which was from Micanopy and La Crosse. They felt they were left out of the process as far as developing the changes to the Urban Reserve Act that they had proposed. And so they had taken those two leaders, went up there and defeated the whole process, threw it off. Representative Chestnut was actually the representative of the bill, and threw it off, and that would have done a lot of similar stuff to this. Is pretty much right on track with what we're doing right now. And so that threw all that off for that. And so whenever it came to us the first time, it was a proposal by Micanopy, was the first one. There was an architect of it, but it was full-out repeal. Well, 8 out of 9 cities voted to repeal it. Representative Watson said you need to get consensus of the representatives. So we went back, and Gainesville actually met with us one night, and it was a League of Cities meeting that was in Newberry. And they said, well, how about this? And that's when they presented the Urban Reserve Act. And it had, or the ideas for the Urban Reserve Act, so it wasn't drafted. But it basically had this whole 10-member board that basically includes these municipalities into the process of setting up the urban reserve areas. So basically just amending the urban reserve areas. So they're already set, they're already frozen, but amending that because they saw value in having that to keep cities, especially from having land grabs over here, to where they start just going after property just for the sake of having property and not wanting other cities to grow on top of it, which, as I mentioned before, happened in South Florida. So that's what the city of Gainesville proposed, and we brought that to the table, and everybody voted for it. And then we went and presented it to the county, and we didn't have enough time to get negotiations for that legislative session this past year. So then we've been working since then on changing some of the language in the Urban Reserve Act to where it includes more people as far as the affected person, as far as being able to appeal it. So an individual person can appeal any kind of urban reserve area, as well as we're changing it where it includes the county, and where also the county is the chair of the board automatically. They're the chair of it, and they're the record keeper of it. So that's all been changed to it from the current version. One second, I see you, Commissioner Byron. I got Commissioner Carlton and you. And so that's where, through the past 8 months, 9 months, all those changes have come place and come full term to this part, meetings even with the county on it, on trying to get something we can work on. And the county also addressed their proposal as well and brought that to us. Commissioner Carlton.
Yeah, on the city limits of Hawthorne,
Mm-hmm.
that is not the actual line where that's not in the city limits now.
Right, this is, the darkest area is all the city limits, the darkest area. This is the urban reserve area. This is where the city's allowed to annex out to, but not go any further according to the Boundary Adjustment Act and even the Urban Reserve Act. You can't go any further out than this area here. So even down here, where it's right up next to 301, you can't go west anymore. You can't go across 301, which is, there's a few residences there, but that's also Alachua Creek Management Area.
Okay.
I mean, Alachua Lake
That's what I
Management
was
Area.
questioning, because looking at that blue mark on the bottom shows, to me, that's the lake is down there out in the county.
Yeah, this is the county, this is Alachua Lake.
No, I'm talking about the small one.
This one, that's Lake Jeffords.
Lake Deptford.
That's
yeah.
in the county, yes sir.
But the city's line goes up there where your finger was to the top.
Right, this is the city limits right here, just before you get to that neighborhood.
Yeah.
So the neighborhood's not in the city limits right there.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yes, sir.
And they voted it out the last time we put it up annexation, that whole area.
I don't think this neighborhood brought it in. I think it was, the last referendum that I remember was all just this part here.
No, they had it on this other.
Did they have it there? Okay,
Yeah.
I remember that.
Annexed that from Plum Creek and Hidden Road all down to there.
Yeah, this part here?
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't remember a referendum there. There are homeowners association might have taken it up, but I don't remember a referendum being there. The last referendum the city of Hawthorne did was right here at this area, down by.
Maybe, but I know there was several.
Right. Commissioner
That
Bauer?
road is still there.
Oh, yeah.
Were you through with your presentation? I didn't want to interrupt if you were.
No, go ahead, go ahead.
One question, one comment.
Yeah.
Did I understand you to say that what's driving the current attempt at reform is Micanopy's desire to be able to put a well field area in the Paynes Prairie State Park, which is in the unincorporated area?
No, that's what started the discussion in 2011. That's what they brought it to the League of Cities to take it up as an action agenda item for the Alachua County League of Cities.
So it sparked
That's what sparked it.
where
Yeah.
we are now. Just so I understand, why does it matter where the well field is located? Is there anything that legally requires it to be in the city of Micanopy?
I haven't dealt with that. Did you actually?
Grants, you couldn't get a grant outside the city limits, so if they wanted to put in a well and get a grant for it, they couldn't do it outside the city
And
limits.
did the county ever take a position opposed to that?
I wasn't on the county commission then.
That's the Paynes Prairie State
Yeah.
Reserve. Okay, because it seems like a rather insurmountable issue.
Right.
So I'm a little surprised that that is what has led to our current
Well,
problem.
yeah, and that's why I even encouraged them to submit a smaller, just like you had said, about having them come back, similar to what you mentioned about having them come back in 2015, 16, and submit a smaller revision, regardless of what happens with what's going on now, to go ahead and get that in the works so that they could have that in case it just stays with what we have now.
Because the city of Gainesville, they were allowed to annex the
Yeah.
Sweetwater, because of a similar situation. But here's my comment. And I appreciate that the League of Cities is trying to come closer to the county's position, but any arrangement of members on this new board that leaves the cities in the majority vote is in a sense going to be leaving the foxes in charge of the hen house. And I don't mean that in a derogatory way, it's just that cities grow, it's what they do. Cities annex, they grow. So the cities are going to vote as a block. So your current proposal leaves you with the majority vote. You can safely ignore the county. There's nothing to prevent you in your very first meeting from divvying up the entire county into urban reserve areas for each of the municipalities. In one fell swoop, Hawthorne could get all the way to Newlands Lake, Micanopy could get all the way to Paynes Prairie, et cetera, all the way around the board. One vote would end it. The county would largely be irrelevant. And so that leaves us in a situation where, as others have pointed out, a big chunk of the people are having their lives perhaps dramatically affected by people they did not get a chance to vote for. As this gentleman pointed out, the county commissioners represent everyone in the county, including the people within the cities. And so everyone has some recourse to the county commission, but the people who live, let's say, west of Hawthorne will be having their lives determined by people who elected someone in Newberry or La Crosse. It's inherently unrepresentative, and no matter how you arrange the numbers, the key is the balance between city votes and unincorporated votes, because the cities will always vote as a block. They have a shared interest. I think it's just common sense. That's the way cities behave.
So would you propose that it be equal?
What, personally, my opinion is that we're trying to fix something that isn't broken. In my opinion, the Boundary Adjustment Act has been a great thing for the county. A lot of people, county commissioners, you go to the Florida Association of County meetings to hear about what we do, they're envious of the fact that we have something that kind of disciplines the cities to behave in a way that's more rational, instead of getting into this kind of competitive annexation war because they're afraid their neighbor's going to swoop in and take their territory. So it leaves, in my opinion, the best entity to referee between cities and also balance their interests with those of the unincorporated area are the only people that are elected by everyone, and that's the county commissioners. So we've had very few problems with the Boundary Adjustment Act. At our last meeting, Mayor Certainty, that you were at with League of Cities, county staff recapped. There have been 2, maybe 3 instances during the 14 years I've been on county commission where there was some kind of controversy. One of them was Micanopy's attempt to add Evanston, all the way over to Evanston in their Urban Reserve Act, which again, no one there wanted overwhelmingly. They were opposed to it, and the county rejected it. I think Hawthorne wanted to expand their extraterritorial reserve westward all the way to Newlands Lake, which county also did not accept. And then lastly, there was a dispute between Gainesville and Alachua, as you pointed out, where they come together, and someone had to referee. And it had to decide between the people who were actually being affected. Some wanted to go to Gainesville, some wanted to go to Alachua. Who's the best entity to referee a dispute like that? In my opinion, it's a group that represents everyone. So those are the only instances where there's been any controversy or any indication that the system is not working well. I think what's driving this and motivating this, I've had these discussions with you trying to understand what's motivating the cities, has been the lack of speed with which annexations can occur, and we've addressed that, as you pointed out. The burden of having to prepare an urban services report, a small town budget, we've addressed that. It's not clear to me what remains as a problem.
Right, and I know the county staff said there was only 3 problems, but actually after talking with the city of Gainesville, there was a lot more problems, even with the city of Gainesville recently with just this, in providing the urban services report. And when they provide the county staff and they come back and there's multiple revisions back and forth, and that comes from the city of Gainesville staff, which is, you know, very, very educated and professional. And so if they're doing that and they're having that kind of problem over just some minor details providing that urban services report, then there's more than just 3 problems. The lady's comment was that there's more than 3 problems, and it wasn't the lady that always attends meetings, it's another lady higher up that says there's 3 problems just within just one day's work on that part right here. So there's more than 3 problems, but those were the main 3 as far as changing any boundary areas that you addressed already. But as far as them changing the proposals and everything, that's what's left out of there. That is right as far as what we wanted to change as far as the timeline. What we wanted to speed up the process, especially we use City of Hawthorne Little Orange Creek Nature Park is a big example as far as being city property out in the unincorporated area, wanting to incorporate it to the city limits, and it's still taking 6 months. So we've included that into it as part of that. That kept us from getting grant funding for opening the park up. That could have possibly already been open because of it, for the comprehensive plan that we had to do just for that park as well, to bring it in. As well as, what the cities mainly want to do is have a role at the table for deciding that part. And we can disagree with that as far as what's happening. But we find value, just as you say, is envious for having these urban reserve areas, for keeping those urban reserve areas so you don't have land grants like we're talking about. So we like that part of that for planning purposes of having that. I fear that if they're successful with their current repeal part and there's nothing put on the table as far as interlocal agreements or anything else, then you will have that land grab where, especially on the west side, it's not as big of a problem on the east side where you have a lot of agricultural lands around it that are natural barriers with the lakes and the prairie and everything else, natural barriers. You don't have that problem as you will over here where it's free range on a lot of flat lands, sinkhole lands, and other areas over there as far as people annexing, especially with Jonesville sitting all in the middle of it. So, Mr. Moore?
Yeah, Representative Perry is apparently, they're putting forth a bill to kill both the county plan and this plan and go back to the state plan.
Right.
Which is very convenient because if under the two county plans and the state plan, the county plan and your plan, in quote, prohibits you from expanding west. Obviously, we're here in concern about Plum Creek. And you've done an excellent job explaining all this. But if they go back to the state law, and the right people get into office, what prohibits Hawthorne from going west all the way to Noonan's Lake, annexing into land that Plum Creek's asked for, and go ahead and build that colossal, whatever they want to call
Right.
it.
Well, if you go to state law, what you'll have to do is you won't have these extraterritorial areas. You won't have these urban reserve areas like what both of our plans have included in them. You'll have nothing there, and you'll have to still have the contiguous property. So you can't just jump property back and forth. You'll still have to have contiguous property, and you can't create enclaves, which would still have to be through here through state law. And as the monitoring part, Ms. Davis brought up about having somebody be a watchdog and keep from having those enclaves. So normally the county would be that person as well as the property owners around here that would be the watchdog as well to keep from having enclaves on any of those. You could have a referendum vote. You could have a referendum vote, but if you had a referendum vote, you'd have to have it, same thing, you'd have to provide the urban services report. You would also then have to meet that 50% or more threshold. I thought it was 60, but the 50% threshold to be able to annex any property in. So you would have that as well. So it wouldn't just be just their property. And actually, if it happened where it includes their property, they're not a registered voter, so they wouldn't technically get a vote in the referendum. As far as the way I understand it, it had to be referendum vote.
Okay, so say they clear their land to be annexed into Hawthorne. How big a corridor do they have to have out to that land?
Well, it'd have to, you can look at different examples all around here of how it would have to be, but it'd have to be contiguous and it couldn't create any enclaves. Not only that, but it'd also have to, in the state law part, you wouldn't have this boundary here to be there.
That, but what I'm thinking is they have enough land that they could they could be contiguous all the way almost to Noonan's Lake.
Right.
If you look at the map.
Right.
So what would prohibit, where do we stand here, state law, what prohibits Plum Creek from coming forth and say, hey, Mayor Surtsey, we want to be annexed in Hawthorne, and we're contiguous all the way to Lake Noonan, and
The state already approved it.
And then you've got those little bitty lots.
Right. Well, you'd have to.
Squeezed right out.
Right. Yeah, and you'd have to keep from these enclaves, even in state law, you'd have to keep from these enclaves happening, even though you see that they do happen.
Yeah, but
and we'd have to,
I think there's
you
smart
appeal
way to
that.
buy up these enclaves before they ever try it.
right, and you'd have, I think it's 60 or 90 days to appeal any kind of annexation as well, to challenge, not to
Who
appeal.
can challenge it?
Any of these property owners, any of the property owners that are affected parties.
Yeah, but how would we be an affected party if they volunteered and our land was not included?
Well, you're still an affected party as far as being around that property. It depends on state law how that's affected too. Do you remember how that's affected? Is if you're creating an enclave, you're an affected party, right?
Yes, but to be clear, challenging something doesn't mean that you're going to win.
Right.
If the default is generally
Right.
in favor of the annexing party.
And also creating an enclave, and especially when you start dealing out here with lack of roads, when you get out here, if you create an enclave, it's also an enclave through infrastructure as far as with the roads as well. Correct, Commissioner Bartley?
Yes. But to be clear,
Mhm.
his question was whether or not, as long as they're connected by doing a corridor 10 feet wide,
Sure.
as long as they
We've
were
seen it.
strung together all the way to Newman's Lake and didn't create a lot blocking an area, it could happen.
So, yeah.
And also, my understanding of the problem, the kind of concern people have about defaulting to state law is that if Representative Perry is successful, that's what will happen, on a complete repeal. Typically, we've been told over and over and over again by our state lobbyists, and the county has state lobbyists, and one of the county commissioners is a former state representative, is that generally local bills like this don't move forward, don't move out of committee unless you have local consensus.
Mhm.
So Representative Perry is welcome to introduce this bill, but if the entire county commission on a 5-0 vote opposes it during the committee hearings, unless traditions simply collapse, it's not going anywhere.
Right.
So that kind of brings us back to, do we want to have the current Boundary Adjustment Act or the proposal from the League of Cities?
Right. Or the revisions by the county as well.
Well,
Everyone agrees with that.
let's think
Right.
about this for a second. We got a governor that's very pro-business. We're expecting to, by the year 2030, to have a 1/3 increase in our population in the state of Florida, which means we're going to have 30 million people instead of 20 million people. From what I'm reading, a large percentage of that is going to settle in mid-Florida. 300,000 new residents for Alachua County by 2030. So it's quite obvious why Plum Creek is doing this. I hesitate greatly about this group in Tallahassee having my better interest at heart.
Right.
And you know, noting that historically this has happened, the way Mr. Marley said it, but I'm wondering if it's going to happen this time. I'm highly suspicious of
You
it.
know, but see, and as Commissioner Brierly said earlier, and about going through local committees, and a good point was the two smallest cities in Alachua County defeated one full bill that was sponsored by all the other municipalities and the county commission all supported it, but La Crosse and Micanopy, the two smallest, defeated it out of local committee, and it was withdrawn. So there's precedent there as far as that happening. As far as what the League of Cities proposal is to keep these urban reserve areas, because we believe there's value in that as far as maintaining the growth and being able to smartly
Nobody's
grow.
arguing.
Right. But I'm just presenting what,
Yeah.
I mean, because I don't know any of the motives. I mean, I know you're inferring a lot of the motives behind Representative Perry's part, but I don't know any of the motives behind there. What we did do after that is, as I've already talked with a couple people as far as with growth management, Mr. Locknick, about drafting interlocal agreements just as a just-in-case type situation. You know, God forbid it goes through, and then we're just stuck with state law. Then we can draft interlocal agreements with the county to freeze these urban reserve areas and even delay that act, the repeal, from going in place before we can get that up. So we have that as a safety net in case it does go through and one of our proposals don't go through.
I think if Mr. Perry, as acting in good faith, he would take away or stop trying to get that law passed, to repeal all this stuff if the League of City voters, League of Cities asked him to.
Right, but I'm not sure what he.
Was the motivating factor.
I know he's clear on our stance as far as what we'd like to see as far as the urban reserve.
Yeah, I understand that, I
So-
understand that.
Mhm.
But what I'm saying is, if you went to Perry and asked him not to press this issue,
Mhm.
he should not press an issue if his motivations are in the right place.
And he may not. He may not. So, and it may come to that.
Do you
It may
have
come
any
to that
plans
even
to
with,
ask him?
what's that?
Do you have any plans to ask him?
Oh, I don't have any plans right now, except to talk with our League of Cities, on hopefully the 19th or the 24th is the 2 dates we're looking at having a meeting on, so.
I just want to follow up on that a little bit, because
Sure.
I've done a little research. I talked to Rob Bradley,
Mhm.
and he says basically, and Commissioner Bryan was correct, to some degree, but the way the political climate is right now is a little bit different. He says basically what happens if something comes up there to Tallahassee, and it's gotten the approval of the local delegation, in the House of Representatives, of course, that's where it's got to be
Right.
initially seen. They will, the whole House will vote for it, because they consider it to be a Alachua County issue. And they think Alachua County is all right. I already planned, and I'll tell anybody here that wants to join me.
Sure.
We're gonna do a road trip, folks. We're going to the state legislature, and it's gonna be a big group, I hope. But here's the thing. You guys from the League of Cities, I don't have a problem, and you and I talked
Oh,
about
yeah, we
this.
talk.
I know you want Hawthorne to be successful, and there's nobody in our group that doesn't want you to be
Mhm.
successful. The problem is, we don't want you to be successful while our life gets destroyed.
Right.
That's what the whole concern is.
I don't
So basically, the League of Cities needs to take a position on this legislation that Perry has done.
Mhm.
Because what Perry has done, he's not doing anything you asked for.
Right.
He's wiping the whole thing out, and all he's gonna do is create chaos in this county.
Mhm.
I know for a fact that Keith Perry has said he sees no problem with anything Plum Creek wants to do, and whatever the quickest way to do it is fine with him. I heard him say that right on the radio in the morning at 8 o'clock. So, what I'm saying is, you guys need to make a position. The citizens that live in the unincorporated county, we're gonna go to Tallahassee one way or the other, whether it's just 2 or 3 of us, or it's gonna be a bus load. And I hope that Commissioner Biley's right with the county commission that they're gonna speak up.
Right.
Because the only way this thing isn't gonna go through that Perry wants is if a large number of people show in Alachua County they're not in favor.
And you know, I guess playing the devil's advocate part of it, the only good that I see that has come out of this is it's forcing the county and the cities back to the table again.
Well, that's.
So, and that's been good as far as, because I mean, in 2 weeks since the legislative hearing, we had, I think it was the 29th. So in 2 weeks, I've had more discussions on this than we've had in the last 8 months, especially with county staff.
Let me just
I think
finish one thing.
it's good.
But, you know, that's what needs to happen. This thing needs to be resolved in Alachua County. It doesn't need to be resolved by Rick Holly. It doesn't need to be resolved by one person. It doesn't need to be resolved by the state legislators. It needs to be resolved in Alachua County. Because if it doesn't get resolved in Alachua County, all it's doing is creating massive problems and hate and discontent within the county. And that's the worst thing that could happen in this county.
Yep.
So I just offer that up.
And you make a great argument for home rule right there, just like we talked about, the county has lobbyists in the state for the
Well,
county.
you know, bring it closest to the people is
Yeah.
always.
There you go.
Did you say you were in charge of the Alachua County League of Cities?
Yeah, well, I'm the president of it. I'm not in charge as far as telling them what they have to do. I mean,
Okay, that would be
I'm
the
bringing
first
it to
question.
them,
The
yes.
second question is then, who is Keith Perry taking this to Tallahassee for, if it wasn't for you?
I don't know.
For the Florida
I
League
mean,
of Cities.
somebody.
Florida League of Cities.
put him
And
on
you're the
the-
vice president.
It's Alachua County League of Cities that's
Right.
proposing this, not Florida League of Cities.
Okay.
So who is he doing this for? He's not even the representative for this area.
Right, but he's a representative
So
for the county.
representative for the area that this land is concerning,
No,
as
no,
far as Palm
See, that's not
Creek
the issue
goes.
on the.
that's not the issue that we're talking about. See, he's a representative for part of the county. Representative Porter has part of High Springs, and Representative Watson has the other part of the county.
So why
So-
is Keith Perry taking this to Tallahassee?
He's part of the legislative delegation here that's heard this last year and this year, and so by his own, Representative Watson has been the one we've been working with on it. So we've been working with actually Representative Watson originally because he was actually city manager in Alachua that had problems with it as well. And so we went to him first, and he worked on it last year, and he said he wouldn't do it unless there was consensus. So that's why we went back, and Gainesville brought consensus to the league for that. So we had all 9 municipalities go in it, and actually all 9 municipalities voted on this, as far as in support of the Urban Reserve Act.
The municipalities?
The municipalities
City of
themselves.
Hawthorne had a vote on this?
Yes, the city of Hawthorne had a vote on the Urban Reserve Act on a notice meeting, had a vote in support of the Urban Reserve Act as it was presented there. With
What year was that?
That was earlier this year. That was the summer. All the cities had a vote on theirs. So, and then the county had theirs as well, and actually I have a presentation right here that the county actually seen, and not the county, the city of Gainesville seen. The county actually didn't, I'll get to you, I've seen Commissioner Bradley as well. The county, we actually had a joint meeting, a couple of joint meetings with the county, and the county voted not to go with the Urban Reserve Act and present their changes themselves for that as far as what we went over earlier. And there was one maybe another possible that was saying, why don't we just go with state law? That was Commissioner Chestnut that said, just go with state law, and there's, I think, another person said, well, why do we do this instead of going with state law? It wasn't a vote for state law, but it was just a comment. Commissioner Brown?
I don't want to certainly put words in Commissioner Chestnut's mouth.
No. I'm just saying that's what happened on a recorded meeting.
But he said, why not let it default to state law? And went on to explain that he thought that everyone would see how bad that is. It would then come back to the board and ask to reintroduce the Boundary Adjustment Act. That was his explanation for why he was okay with it defaulting to state law. I don't personally agree with him on that.
Yeah.
That was his position.
Yeah.
When you said that Representative Watson would not move forward unless there was consensus, did he only mean consensus among the League of Cities, or did he include Alachua County?
He said consensus locally, but it didn't have to be unanimous. So that's why we brought in everybody into this, and that's why we presented it to the county as well to get them on board. But obviously that didn't work.
So in most people's minds, consensus means everyone agrees.
Well,
That's what consensus means.
Well,
So when he said consensus,
Mhm.
did he say that he'd be okay if the League of Cities wanted one thing and the county commission wanted the exact
All his
opposite?
words
He'd be
were,
okay with the
he
League of
didn't
Cities?
say one or the other. All he said was consensus, but it doesn't have to be unanimous. He never said it had to be unanimous. Is what his words were to me. So that's to myself and Mayor Kerber. So we were both there. So that's what this was. But he obviously was set to bring it up at this legislative hearing, and at the last minute, as was alluded to earlier, Representative Perry actually filed it through state staff to notice the meeting as well, and that's whenever this got brought up. Do y'all want me to show you? I skipped completely over the slideshow for the city of Gainesville.
Oh, God, please do.
And please do, okay. I'll just go through real quick. A lot of it's the history part of it.
No, please do skip it.
I don't want to not present.
Yeah, I think we're all kind of country on by now.
I think it's turned on.
Well, all that, as a rhetorical question, isn't this? This is a rhetorical question. If Representative Perry isn't representing you, and he's not representing Alachua County, he's not doing what they want,
Always.
who is he representing? And I
That's
know you
what
can't
I'm
answer.
wondering.
I can't answer that, yeah, because I didn't present it to him as far as the
And
video.
obviously to us, we know who he represents.
All right, so just bear with me real quick and we'll get through this. All right, so this was presented, I think it was July or August to the city of Gainesville. Probably have today maybe on here. So repeal and replace the Boundary Adjustment Act with the Urban Reserve Act. And it just gave a brief part of it of how it got started, which we went through that earlier. A special act of the state legislature when it was enacted and all that in 1990. So it preempts other laws for annexations. It all any kind of annexations or a contract action has to go through here, through the reserve areas. So it sets procedures establishing and updating urban reserves, and all activity related to municipal annexation is governed by general law, is what the Urban Reserve Act is proposing. So it still has the same part, so everything goes by the state for annexation. The only change is that it keeps the urban reserve areas is what the Urban Reserve Act would have. So 3 pages. So this just shows the same map that we've been talking about over here, the same exact map. The extraterritorial areas are even harder to see on this, but they're there. So, but basically the idea of the urban reserve areas is to plan long-term growth as far as for your utilities and city services. So this is a timeline of what the process was, what's happened up until this point. So November of 13, this is whenever we started trying to get back to this idea of the formal part. Mayor Shutterly brought it to us in 2011. We had put it on the back burner, and then it finally gained some momentum and came up in November 2013, actually a little bit before then, but this is basically whenever the legislative delegation took it up. At their annual, they have an annual legislative hearing for everybody in the county to attend and speak at. So this just goes through the process. In January, the League of Cities discussed alternatives to repealing the Boundary Adjustment Act, and that was actually at the Newberry meeting that I mentioned earlier, that the Gainesville brought back and said, okay, instead of repealing, let's keep the urban reserve areas instead of do a repeal in place. So then we had a discussion and joint meeting with the county in February, and seeing that we couldn't come up with anything to any kind of consensus, unanimous decisions on how to address that then, and so we then set forth to try and get back to this area to where we could negotiate over the summer and try and get something all together for that. So basically, it's just a planning tool to promote growth and annexations within Alachua County by having the urban reserve areas around the area, so it's not a land grab. It's basically the purpose of the Urban Reserve Act. It supplements general law, so you'll still have special acts for general law, but this is basically just going with the urban reserve area. So it's you have to be in the urban reserve area to be able to do any annexation, so it's a supplement to it. It has the affected persons, as we mentioned earlier, we added the county to it, so it's not just the cities or the person, the individual. That was the biggest thing that we were trying to address is state law didn't have the individual as part of it, and Commissioner Pinkston actually brought that up, and so that's when we brought in the affected person as being an individual as well. So basically just saying that the reserve areas designates where annexations are allowed to happen, it has to be in there. So basically establishing the urban reserve areas, so we go ahead and freeze the urban reserve areas that were last adopted and finalized on October 9th, 2011, which is what you see up here, and go with that. Basically it takes out of how many pages of how whenever the Boundary Adjustment Act was first started, it set a line, I think it was probably 3 pages itself on how the boundaries were first created. So it's basically a historical part. 3 pages of this Boundary Adjustment Act was just on how the history of it. So we basically eliminated all that and just put, okay, we're going to freeze what we have now, where we're at now. October 9th, 2011 was the last time they were changed, and we're going to go with that forward. So, and that last revision was by the City of Gainesville, as Commissioner Barrow mentioned. And this establishes an Urban Reserve Review Board, which, as we talked about earlier, we didn't all agree on that. That's fine too as well. And that's still some of the discussion as far as the composition of that board, of how we change that around. So, so we'll see how that changes. But it basically goes to a board to address, which currently does, as far as, but that board is the county commission right now. And there's been some discussion about having that as just advisory board to make recommendations to the county commission. So that's another one that I left out earlier. So that's another, just giving you some ideas as we talk about this. As far as everybody's been generating different possibilities, so it's a very liquid part. But 4/5 is actually the quorum. We actually changed part of it to where you could have a meeting and discuss items with just a simple majority, but to take action you have to have 4/5 to be able to vote on any kind of changes to the urban reserve area or anything else. and the chair of the Urban Reserve Board. That is now changed. Before it was the Urban Reserve Review Board would meet and they'd appoint a chair amongst them, and then they'd be in charge of the record keeping. The county seeing that as being a problem as far as who would be that chair and who would maintain that responsibility. And so then we just appointed the county and said, y'all can be the chair. Y'all can be the chair, and now y'all have to fight over it if there's 2 members. Who wants to be the chair? But so they'd be the chair, and then they'd be the record holders for that, since they're already doing that now as well. But all of this, anything that comes before the Urban Reserve Review Board would obviously have to go through a city as well already to make that presentation. So their city would already have to have that information for public record as well. So if the city of Hawthorne or Waldo or McNook or anybody else brought a recommendation to that board, it'd already be public record. Sets procedures for petition for amendment. So if the Urban Reserve Review Board is basically just kind of like a mediator, first level, and so after that, if you didn't like that, then you can appeal that as well. And actually, I got a butt in front of myself on that, because this is just talking about once a city appeals or sets a petition to change their board and their boundaries and bring something to that board, that the board has to meet within 90 days. They don't have to take action within 90 days, but they have to meet within 90 days to start discussing it. And then this is the appeal. So they make a petition to the Division of Administrative Hearings challenging the decision. So that's any affected person within that. So whether it's another city, county, or an individual, you'd be able to appeal for that. So the criteria for the urban reserve areas is the same criteria as what's in the Boundary Adjustment Act, Section 8. And so that's basically be adjacent to the municipality, be urban in character, or likely to become urban in character within the next 10 years, and be areas where population growth should be directed so as to promote efficient delivery of urban services. So that's the same thing that the county currently makes a decision about already. And then just to support the repeal and replace the Alachua County Boundary Adjustment Act with the Alachua County Urban Reserve Act. So for the 2015 legislative agenda. And they actually voted unanimous for this. Question on that? I know that's a lot of what we've already talked about, but that's basically what it is. And what Representative Perry's thing is to go with complete state law, not going with Urban Reserve Act or the Boundary Adjustment Act or the Boundary Adjustment Act with the modifications. So there's really 4 options here. If we don't do anything, it just stays with the Boundary Adjustment Act. If we take the county's recommendation, then we do the Boundary Adjustment Act with the recommendations. If we do the Urban Reserve Act, then we go with state law for the annexation part of it, but you have the caveat that it has to be within the urban reserve area, and you have to have, it has the affected person in it, and you have to have an Urban Reserve Review Board for modifying that urban reserve boundary, which is still up there what the composition of that's going to be. But as proposed right now on paper is a 10-member panel. And so those are the basic differences for all of those. I know it's a lot, it's a mouthful and everything else. Probably did the best job, but I appreciate y'all participating. And I'd be happy to answer your questions still.
It'd be like somebody in Tallahassee, that authority is trying to take all the authority away from our own area right here.
Right.
Not all right, so.
Yes, sir. And that's what we're trying to do, is trying to
I see that's what you're trying to do.
negotiate locally and trying to resolve locally.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments?
Many people want to go to Tallahassee.
Why is the time 6 months? Why does it take 6 months? Why can it not be decreased? Some of this is that problem.
Right.
I mean, why?
Right, and that's what we
Why can't
address.
be more efficient?
Right, and that's what we're trying to address with the, because if you do the annexation part of it with the state part, that's what we address part of it. So we find some benefit with that, but we don't want it to be a land grab as far as the League of Cities part of it. As far as with the county part of it, and I can let Mr. Browder speak on his own, but basically it just takes out that hearing part, and then they've also voluntarily, for this next part, offered to be the person that does, especially for the smaller cities, whether it's Hawthorne, Lacrosse, any of these smaller cities. If you aren't able to generate the urban services report, they'll offer to help. So that was nice of y'all to do that. Appreciate it.
It's also probably clear that 6 months is not necessarily an average. That's not how long it takes annexation to go through every single time. The average, the minimum required by what the county and cities are obligated to do is actually quite a bit less than that. I don't know why it took that long in that case. Maybe there were complicating factors. Maybe Christmas intervened. Maybe they had extra hearings. I don't know.
No,
But
it's
So
essentially-
there's two counties.
But essentially what the county's proposed is a process that I think the county staff used to work with approximately cut the current time about in half.
Right. And the 6 months is pretty accurate.
I'm
Some
not
cities.
saying it didn't take that long.
No. I'm talking about average too, because some cities it takes even longer. We have 2 meetings a month in the city of Hawthorne. City of Gainesville, they have more meetings than that in a month, and so they can advertise and do all that and have those meetings. We only have 2. We only have 1 actually by our charter required. 1 meeting a month required, but we do 2 because they keep the meetings from being longer and getting long-winded.
So is it more money?
So, well, it's money and time, but it's also the time as far as you have to advertise for so many days ahead for a public hearing. So you have that as well. So there's a few caveats, and which is good, because what it does, some is fine. It's just trying to play that balance between too much and too little. You don't want to be too fast to where everybody gets left out of the process. And, if you have
That's it next week.
if you have Little Orange Creek Nature Park next to you and it's coming into the city and you're right next to it, you want to be able to know that that's coming in there. That's why they make those orange signs up. And so, that's the whole process of it. But you just don't want it to be 6 months, even when we had, state or county planning working on it. And so it's not like the staff wasn't very versed on it. So they knew what they were doing. It's just couldn't go through the process quick enough because all the requirements for it. So, and it's not that the county staff was putting us off and not
Just
wanting us to
process.
do it. It's just following the process.
Right.
And county staff has acknowledged that and said that we'll cut it in half. It's 3 to 4.5 that they said that they cut it down to from 6 months. So,
See, to me, that means we have too many laws. We have too many things in the system
right.
that you run into one thing and it's a problem.
Right.
Then we run into another one. Sounds to me like something needs to be revised.
Well, and to me, if I was able to be whatever for a day and just be able to do whatever we could, it would be to take this out of Tallahassee, this state law out of Tallahassee,
Absolutely.
and put it in the county charter is what I would do.
To
And
me,
then
it's
that
more of a
way,
county
we
issue
can
instead
resolve
of
it
a
locally
state.
and never even bring in the state legislature. But that's what, in a perfect world, I would do. But this is in 1990 something, and they probably never had any, part of this, any vision of this coming up as being a problem. A lot of people were just voting against being consolidated. So it's one of those things that I think was it Kirkpatrick that was a representative then, senator then? Was he a senator then?
He was a senator.
Senator. And so it was back then that he was representing that they said, we're tired of hearing this every time. Let's come up with something or go with the Boundary Adjustment Act, one or the other. And so that's how it got brought into. And it would have been better if it would have just gone to the county charter, in my opinion. And that way we could have it locally, we could vote on it locally as just a referendum vote with the county. So, yes, ma'am?
So basically, there's only 2 bones of contention between the county and the League of Cities, is that right?
The main
One
one-
is the boundaries, the urban boundaries, right?
No.
That's
Just,
up.
well, setting the boundaries. We all agree on where the boundaries are right now, but who sets them? The municipalities want to be included in the process. And as I mentioned before, Commissioner Byerly just a second ago, is another proposal that another representative came up with, was just being an advisory panel and making a recommendation to the commission.
So really,
So
the significant
that being it.
difference is that the League of Cities wants municipalities to have 2 to 3 times the voting power of a citizen that is not living in a municipality. That's the difference. Cities want more power to make decisions, want the county to have less.
not necessarily wants to be involved in the decision.
And then they call it home rule, but meanwhile, the Florida League of Cities is busy trying to supersede all that with state legislation. I mean, that's like a pretty clever
How's
use
that?
of taking over the word home rule.
Yeah.
Like you took over the word early on, land grab. And the fact is, this is gonna lead to land grabs if you cut all this loose and you make a little board and like 7 people get to make all the decisions. This county commission has no power whatsoever.
They
It's
sound-
disingenuous.
well-
And it made the back of my head hurt. That kind of thing really makes me angry.
Oh,
It's
sorry,
wrong.
your head's hurting.
It's wrong.
Yeah.
I don't get headaches.
Well,
When somebody does something like that, it's
well,
wrong.
you're off a little bit, and then Commissioner Byerly alluded to it earlier, is that if you have a 7-member board, you can't just have just the cities, and the assumption that he's had several times is that the cities would just go along together for everything.
They
I
usually
can,
do.
but I can guarantee you, if it's something like that over here, and you have cities, you have cities growing towards each other, why would the city of Newberry approve the city of Gainesville to be over here, or the city of Alachua approve the city of Gainesville, or anybody else to be over here? And I know the assumption is you scratch your back, I'll scratch yours, or you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. But I can almost guarantee you that won't happen. But also, what's trying to happen, and what the league's trying to do, is trying to get it to where that just if all the cities voted together. And that's why I'm trying to get to the seven member and the super majority. If all the cities voted together, you still wouldn't have everybody. You still wouldn't be able to pass it because of having to have the super majority. You had to have 6 out of 7 to be able to pass it. So you still need a county commissioner on it to be able to go through that. And that's appointed by the county commission of who represents them on that. And it could be liquid as far as who they want to represent them. So that would be part of it. The other part of it is you could still appeal that. So even though it passes that review board, however the composition is determined, then you could still appeal that decision, and so it wouldn't just change overnight in that direction. Also, you don't have the land grab because you may have the land grab within this area, within the urban reserve areas, but you have those boundaries that keep you from going outside of that area. So you can't just say that there's going to be a land grab like what is used in South Florida. That's what the term is for that, is where in Broward County there is no unincorporated area. All the cities touch down there. And so that's not what we're trying to get to. What we're trying to get to is just to be able to be part of the process that sets up these boundaries and however that part composition comes
We
up.
are